Hello everyone. Happy Friday. How's it going? How's everybody doing? I'm okay. Hello. Hello to Farmhouse. Anyone else in the chat? A bunch of names I don't recognize. I don't know if anyone is actually behind those. A little sleepy today. A little sore. I went to Kung Fu yesterday. And, worked pretty hard. Tried my best. So I'm feeling it a bit today. My muscles are a little sore. Mostly my arms today. I was worried it was going to be my legs. Last night I was thinking my legs would be sore, but it's mostly my arms that are sore today, I think. It's a bit rainy today, too. Not the nice weather we had yesterday. Farmhouse is also sore. Farmhouse had physio. Sharkies are commenting on my physique. What? Is it weird? Welcome to the stream, Sharkies. As per usual, I'm Muscle Wizard. Foolish? What? What are you talking about? I'm just my normal Muscle Wizard self on this 32nd of March. Do I need to... There, are you more comfortable now? Or does that make it worse? So how's everybody doing today? Anything new? Anything unusual? Farmhouse has many bruises from physio. Oh, D&D tomorrow. That's exciting, Sharkies. I'm excited. I hope everything ends well and leaves everyone feeling good about the game. How many players are in your game, by the way? I don't remember. Five players. So is that 6 of you total then, counting the dungeon master? Oops. My coat's slipping. It's having trouble containing my muscliness. Some people say Muscle Wizard should wear a robe. I feel like that doesn't get the point across. A coat, this could be called a robe of sorts. says, COVID times mean that people tend to be over less often. So cleaning tends to be more... Cleaning? Did I miss a conversation about cleaning? Oh, a lot of cleaning. Right. I gotcha. Turkeys say a bard, a cleric, a paladin, a necromancer, and a swashbuckly pirate. That's fun. That's a decently well-rounded party. I'd say you got most of the bases covered. Right? You've got, theoretically, support with the bard, healing with the cleric and the paladin, damage probably with the necromancer and the pirate, and healing with the bard, yeah. Lots of healing. Yeah, in theory, lots of healing. I mean, even the necromancer could potentially have some healing, depending on how it's built. Is it a necromancer wizard or a necromancer cleric? No real tanks? Oh, the paladin isn't tanky? Necro wizard, okay. So then no healing probably from the necromancer. And yeah, depending on how you build them, paladins can put out a fair amount of damage. What's all in our party in our Curse of Strahd game? We've got a warlock. That's Farmouse. We've got a bard, I believe, right? We've got a druid. And and paladin. Paladin? No, cleric. We don't have a paladin. We've got a cleric fighter. So we don't precisely, like, I don't think our bard is really built like a skill monkey. So we don't exactly have a skillful type. Sharky say, my paladin uses a lance while riding a fey mountain goat. That sounds great. That's... hi, puppy. Look at that pup. Oh, what a cutie pup. Farmo says we do have a fair amount of skills spread out between the four of us. Do we? Do you? The goat's name is Marsa Goats. The cleric, not the cleric, the bard in our party is a satyr named, he introduced himself as Mr. Oren, but his full name is Capri Chestnut Oren. Capri Chestnut Oren. Capri C. Oren. The first initial doesn't get the point across, I think, Farmouse. You need the full first name. Technically, I think he's... I see. Technically, I think he spelled his last name slightly differently than that. I think it was like A-U-R-E-N, maybe. Maybe it was O-R-I-N or something else. I'm not sure either. Yeah. The players in my game have just gotten to like level 3-ish, I think. I think they're all level 3 right now. But I don't think they've really had a chance to flex their third level muscles yet. So how about that book? Is everybody excited for reading today? Sharky's game is at level 9, but started at 2. 9 is nice. I like the range of like 9 to like 12 or 13. I feel like that's a good area where your characters are starting to feel actually powerful. Like they can do things that, most mortal beings cannot do. But they're not completely like, necessarily bouncing between realities or doing just stuff that is too difficult to compensate for. Like they're not tearing apart the fabric of reality type thing. They're strong, but you can still play a fun, balanced game with them. And I think that at that level, most of the classes line up pretty well power wise. Nobody's really like getting left behind or anything like that. So I think that between like 7-ish, 7, 8, 9 to like 12 or 13 is the range that I really think that D&D can really shine at. Sharky say not fighting too many world destroying enemies. Well, yeah, they don't need to fight world destroying enemies in order to have a challenge. I don't know, it's a fun range. You get to start like doing really neat things as a player. You start getting some interesting class abilities and like spells and things. You get some of the flashier magic. Um, Even the non-magical classes are like getting cool abilities where they just feel really strong. That's a good area. I have never actually in any game, I don't think, played. I don't know if I've ever played above like a 15th level character. I've played in lots of games, but they all almost always start at a lower level. Like I've never played a game that started at a really high level. Maybe like level 3 is the highest I've started at, I think. Maybe. Maybe like level 5 in a one shot. Or something like that. But I don't think I've ever played above like level 15 because the games all end before we get there and we don't start high enough to be there. Farmhouse having some Eldritch Bast problems. Oh boy. I'd like to play like a high level game at least once. Um, but I enjoy the journey of leveling up my character. So it's not like I want to start a game at level 20 or at level 15, you know? I enjoy the process of like starting off with your character that's basically a nobody and then having them get stronger and stronger and like having the story that goes with that, the character development and stuff. um, but I don't know, you'd have to play a game for like a couple of years, I think, or play a game for like maybe 1 year, but like every week, to have characters level up from 1 to 20. I think I don't know exactly how long it should take if you're using the rules appropriate leveling, um, because you're not going to level up every session, right? So let's say like you level up a little faster early game, I think. But let's say on average you level up once every even like even if you level up every 3 sessions, that's still a minimum of like what? It's under 60 because you're not gaining 20 levels. Um, but still, you're looking at probably around like 55-ish sessions, probably. Just throwing out a random number there. Possibly more, possibly less. Probably not less, I would guess. To get to level 20 from level 1. That's a lot of playing. That's a lot of gaming. That's not a short story. Yeah, yeah. I like milestone leveling. Um, I think there are theoretical downsides to it. Um, Depending on how exactly it's used. I am using it basically using milestone leveling in the game we're running right now. It's definitely less work for the GM than experience leveling, right? But I think you kind of have to sort of keep a tally in your head as the GM for using milestone leveling of what the players have done since their last level, and sort of kind of basically like keep an idea of the experience in your mind, because I think the downside to milestone leveling is if you don't take into account everything that the players are doing, if you only actually give them levels at big milestones, like, okay, they're going to level up when they reach this specific city, then that might make the players, like, if they kind of become aware of that, that might make them disinclined to do things that don't offer other rewards. Possibly, right? You know, it depends on your player group. It depends on what their motivations are. If they're just playing the game just to have fun and to enjoy the story, then I don't think you need to worry about it. Give them a level whenever it's appropriate. But I think it's a good idea, you know, to keep in mind what they've done and not just pre-establish in your mind specifically when they're going to level up. You know, make it based on their actual achievements. And Sharky say a player killer DM could use it against the players easier. Yeah, I do my very best to not play players versus DM Dungeons and Dragons. I think that's pretty not fun for most people. So, let's talk about the book. The Little Book of Big Corgi Butts. Forward by Stephen King. As always, got to show off that cover art. Did you know that Corgi Butts make the best bookmarks and birthday cards? There's that cover art again. Oh, let's look at this guy. If you have a library and a corgi, you have everything you need. Look at that hipster corgi. Smelling a tulip. Farmos is really looking forward to the chapter on how to draw a unicorgi. Let's see. Let's just skip ahead. There's no sense in... Oh, hang on. How to draw that embarrassing corgi selfie that won't go away. Look at that guy. I got big old chin paunch going on there. Bottom teeth's showing. That's not the unicorgi though. Let's find the unicorgi. Oh, hang on, before that. How to draw a chonky food thieving corgi. Oh, look at this guy. He stole the pizza. Oh, corgi, that's not good for puppies. It's got tomatoes on it. And there's probably like garlic or something. What's next to that? Well, hang on. Do not turn your back on that pizza. Ugh. Too late. Chonkers, the corgi, stole a slice. And now he's giving you side-eye because you should have just offered to share. He'll teach you some manners just as soon as he's done dripping grease all over his face, the rug, and your pillow. Oh, chonkers. Anyways, what's next to that? How to draw a loaf of bread that might actually be a corgi. Bamboozled, am I right? Look at that. Is it a loaf of bread or a corgi? Hard to tell from this angle. Hard to tell from all angles. Are we even sure there's a difference? Ha ha. Sharky say Chonkers is a great name. Alright, and here's the moment that Farmos has been waiting for. How to draw a unicorgi that loves you very much. It's not focusing too well on the eyes there, but oh man, it's giving you a loving look. I have been meaning to watch The Mitchells versus the Machines, I think partly because you had mentioned before that it was really good, but we just haven't gotten around to it yet. So no, I have not yet seen The Mitchells versus the Machines. We all need a friend. Sometimes those friends are imaginary. Sometimes they're mythical creatures. Sometimes we need to draw them for ourselves. Sometimes they're all three, and that's when they're the best friend we could ever ask for. I don't know if I 100% agree about them being the best friend we could ever ask for. It's hard to hug an imaginary creature, even if you've drawn it on paper. Okay, one more. How to draw a derpy corgi. Look at that guy. The derpometer reports today will be sunny. It's already wrong. With a 110% chance of slobber on your favorite shoes. So grab a mop and a pencil and let's draw this derpy doofus and his drool into existence. There's also lots of coloring. Look at this. That's pretty great. And oh, beach bum corgi. Those shades. Sorry, you say Sailor Korg. Yeah. We got some corgi crosswords. I don't know how many corgi related words you're getting. What the heck is 2 across on this? Fleecy pad with hidden treasures to encourage foraging insects. 10 letters long. Fleecy pad with hidden treasures to encourage foraging insects. I have no idea what that is. What's 11 down here? 1, 2, 3, 4. Another 10 letters, 11 down. Disc throwing and an ultimate game for dogs and people. Well, I mean, I can think of some. Maybe it's like frisbee golf? No, couldn't be frisbee golf. Disc golf? That wouldn't be long enough. Or no. Snuffle pad? Is that 10 letters? Yeah, that's... With hidden treasures to encourage foraging insects. That doesn't sound very good. Oh, boy. No, to encourage foraging insects. It's kind of gross, isn't it? Alright, well, I got news for everybody. April Fools, it's actually me, Sleet. I gotcha. It wasn't Muscley Wizard. It was me the whole time. And we're not reading the little book of Corgi Butts today anymore beyond what we already read. We're going to read Queen of Sorcery by David Eddings, like we have been reading this whole time. Did I get it? Did I get ya? Did I get ya? I'm a little warm. I'm going to take the coat off. Farmo says, "Oh man, I'm so fooled. I thought I might have got ya." I swore it was Muscley Wizard. I like that you got the 2 Z's. Sharky say, "Oh hey, Sleet," said Mister. "I had to get up to move some dinner around. You just missed Muscley Wizard." 2 Z's. Muscley Wizard. To move some dinner around. Like the hat. It's spelled, says Farmos, on the hat. Alright. Well, it's nearly 7:30. It's 7:26. Let's quickly do a recap. So, in chapter 23, Garion's feeling very sorry for himself, with good reason. I don't think anybody's holding that against him except for his Aunt Pole for some reason, who really just wants him to hurry on past that and get to learning to control his magic. Meanwhile, Imperial Princess Sinedra has offered, maybe as kind of a peace offering, to teach him something else, which is how to read and write. Garion thought, oh, I don't need to learn to write, just reading is fine. Also, Garion also needed to learn how to shave. And everyone on the boat, because they are on Greldic's boat, everyone on the boat had opinions about that. So we had a little bit of normalcy in there. He had a brief exchange with the dry voice in his mind, and multiple exchanges with his Aunt Pole in his mind, which he is not happy about. Barak is worried that Garion is now going to catch cold in his face. And so that's where we're at. Chapter 24 on page 260 in my copy, out of 322. Getting closer and closer. All right. Just imagined the voice as the off-brand Bubs from Homestar Runner. Was Bubs the really, like, round guy? Which one was Bubs? And kind of a high-pitched, like, I don't know. It's been a while since I've watched Homestar Runner anything. There was that one update, I think on April 1st, like 3 years ago or something, or 4 years ago. Bubs was the store owner with the blue face. Oh, they took her gerbs? Is that Homestar Runner? I know the guy. I remember, yeah, I know the guy. Really, like, lanky, right? Maybe big pants or something. I feel like I might be getting him mixed up. That line might be mixed up from something else, I think. Oh, am I thinking of the coach guy? Alright, give me a second. Let me look at Bubs. Coach Z. Oh. Okay, I do remember Bubs, but I honestly don't remember what Bubs sounds like. Every now and then, not frequently, but every now and then I think about going back and watching some Homestar Runner stuff. Really, I just leaned forward. Now I'm out of focus? Come on. Yeah, I was thinking of Coach Z. The off-brand one was a plushy Bubs with a horn. Oh. There was a new Homestar Runner video today? Oh. Oh, they're keeping up the... Because they did that a few years ago, right? I don't know if they've done it every year since then, but a few years ago they updated and did like a Homestar Run, like a Strong Bad email, I think. B-mail. It's B-mail. Alright. So, where we ended chapter 23 was they reached the mouths of the rivers... The mouths of the River of the Serpent in central Nyissa. I guess it's one river, yeah, with 5 mouths reaching the ocean. You can see it right here. They say not new stuff often, but here and there, mostly Strong Bad Twitter updates. And they set their oars into the locks so that because they're taking the ship straight to Sistor. No traveling on foot through Nyissa for this group. All right, I'm gonna get into it. Hey Google, set corner lights to dark green.
Got it. Changing 3 lights to dark green.
Just to add a hint. Mostly I can see it on the page of my book. I don't know if you can tell that it's got a greenish tinge from the light. Alright, chapter 24. There was no air. It seemed as if the world had suddenly been turned into a vast, reeking pool of stagnant water. The River of the Serpent had 100 mouths. I guess only 5 are shown on the map, but apparently it's got 100. Each creeping sluggishly through the jellied muck of the delta, as if reluctant to join the boisterous waves of the sea. The reeds which grew in that vast swamp reached a height of 20 feet, and were as thick as woven fabric. There was a tantalizing sound of a breeze brushing the tops of the reeds, but down among them all thought or memory of breeze was lost. There was no air. The delta steamed and stank beneath a sun that did not burn so much as boil. Each breath seemed to be half water. Insects rose in clouds from the reeds and settled in mindless gluttony on every inch of exposed skin, biting, feeding on blood. Ugh. That brings back some bad memories from a particular filming day in a kind of marsh. So many mosquitoes, I was losing my mind. Sharkies think that was a President's Choice product. Memories of Breeze. It's an air freshener that's just air. There's no scent. It's just canned air. Memories of Breeze. am I all out of focus? Come on. Come on. Work with me here. I'm back here. I'm back here. There's a brief moment of focus, like, here. This is where it wants to focus, apparently. If I sit like this, we're okay. They were a day and a half among the reeds before they reached the first trees, low, scarcely more than bushes. The main river channel began to take shape as they moved slowly on into the Nyissan heartland. The sailors sweated and swore at their oars, and the ship moved slowly against the current, almost as if she struggled against a tide of thick oil that clung to her like some loathsome glue. Sounds a little like the River Ankh. I mean, this doesn't sound like you can quite walk on it. The trees grew taller, then immense. Great gnarled roots twisted up out of the ooze along the banks like grotesquely misshapen legs. And trunks, vast as castles, reached up into the steaming sky. We've got a very descriptive chapter here, don't we? Ropey vines undulated down from the limbs overhead, moving, seeming to writhe with a kind of vegetable will of their own in the breathless air. Sharky say, plus this sounds unpleasant, but natural. Ankh sounds very human-influenced. Yeah, that's fair. Shaggy tatters of grayish moss descended in 100-foot-long streamers from the trees, and the river wound spitefully in great coils that made their journey 10 times as long as it needed to be. Unpleasant sort of place, Hetar grumbled, dispiritedly looking out over the bow at the weedy surface of the river ahead. Oh, even Hetar's grumpy. He had removed his horsehide jacket and linen undertunic, and his lean torso gleamed with sweat. Like most of them, he was covered with the angry welts of insect bites. My very thought, Mandoralin agreed. One of the sailors shouted and jumped up, kicking at his oar handle. Something long, slimy, and boneless had crawled unseen up his oar, seeking his flesh with an eyeless voracity. Leech, Dernick said with a shudder, as the hideous thing dropped with a wet plop back into the stinking river. I've never seen one so big. It must be a foot long or more. Ugh. A foot-long leech? Ugh. 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 And climbing up along the oar to get at you? No. No, I don't want that. Sharky say, if the never-ending story has taught us anything, Hetar can't ride a horse here. You had to go there, didn't you? Sharky say, yuck, wet plops. Yeah, that's the gross part of this. That's the part that we're focusing on. Ew, it plopped wetly. Ugh. That is disgusting. What plopped wetly? Oh, a foot-long leech. Weech? I almost said weech. Wunch. Probably not a good place for swimming, Hetar observed. I wasn't considering it, Dernick said. Good. Aunt Pole, wearing a light linen dress, came out of the cabin beneath the high stern where Greldick and Barak were taking turns at the tiller. She had been caring for Sinedra, who had drooped and wilted like a flower in the brutal climate of the river. Can't you do something? Garion demanded of her silently. Oh, look at him initiating conversations this way. Farmo says, wow, thanks, Horse Chief Obvious. He's not a chief yet, I don't think. He's just a Shadar. The Sharkies say, good choice for heat, Linen. Can't you do something? Garion demanded of her silently. About what? All of this. He looked around helplessly. What do you want me to do? Drive off the bugs, if nothing else. Why don't you do it yourself, Belgarion? He set his jaw. No! It was almost a silent shout. It isn't really very hard. No! She shrugged and turned away, leaving him seething with frustration. Maybe that's him being a little stubborn at this point. And maybe, maybe a little hypocritical. I get that stubbornness, though. I've been there, especially, in my teens. There were definitely times where I decided that I wasn't going to do something, and then I wouldn't do it, even if it maybe started to make sense to. It took them 3 more days to reach this tor. The city was embraced in a wide coil of the river and was built of black stone. The houses and buildings were low, and for the most part were windowless. In the center of the city, a vast pile of a building rose with strangely shaped spires and domes and terraces, oddly alien-looking. Wharves and jetties poked out into the turbid river, and Greldick guided his ship toward one which was much larger than the rest. "We have to stop at customs," he explained. "Inevitably," Dernick said. The exchange at customs was brief. Captain Greldick announced that he was delivering the goods of Radek of Boktor to the Drasnian Trade Enclave. Then he handed a jingling purse to the shaven-headed customs official, and the ship was allowed to proceed without inspection. "You owe me for that, Barak," Greldick said. "The trip here was out of friendship, but the money's something else again." "Write it down someplace," Barak told him. "I'll take care of it when I get back to Val Alorn." "If you ever get back to Val Alorn," Greldick said sourly. "I'm sure you'll remember me in your prayers then," Barak said. "I know you pray for me all the time anyway, but now you've got a bit more incentive." "Is every official in the whole world corrupt?" Dernick demanded irritably. "Doesn't anyone do his job the way it's supposed to be done without taking bribes?" "The world would come to an end if one of them did," Hetar replied. "You and I are too simple and honest for these affairs, Dernick. We're better off leaving this kind of thing to others." "It's disgusting, that's all." "That may be true," Hetar agreed. "But I'm just as happy that the customs man didn't look below decks. We might have had some trouble explaining the horses." Farmo says turbid is a good word. The sailors had backed the ship into the river, again, and rowed toward a series of substantial wharves. They pulled up beside the outer wharf, shipped their oars, and looped the hawsers around the tar-blackened pilings of a mooring spot. "You can't moor here," a sweaty guard told them from the wharf. "This is for Drasnian ships." "I'll moor any place that suits me," Greldick said shortly. "I'll call out the soldiers," the guard threatened. He took hold of one of their hawsers and pulled out a long knife.
If you cut that rope, friend, I'll come down there and tear off your ears, Greldick warned. Go ahead and tell him, Barak suggested. It's too hot for fighting. My ship's carrying Drasnian goods, Greldick told the guard on the wharf. Belonging to a man named Radek, from Boktor, I think. Oh, the guard said, putting away his knife. Why didn't you say so in the first place? Because I didn't like your attitude, Greldick replied bluntly. Where do I find the man in charge? Drawblack? His house is just up that street, past the shops. It's the one with the Drasnian emblem on the door.
Sharky say, threats first, explanations later. Yeah, like they have a legitimate reason to be at that dock. But Greldick says it's because he wants to. Oh, boy. I like that Barak was the voice of reason here.
I've got to talk with him, Greldick said. Do I need a pass to go off the wharf? I've heard some strange things about this tour. You can move around inside the Enclave, the guard informed him. You only need a pass if you want to go into the city.
Greldick grunted and went below. A moment later, he came back with several packets of folded parchment.
Do you want to talk to this official? He asked Aunt Pole. Or do you want me to take care of it?
We'd better come along, she decided. The girl's asleep. Tell your men not to disturb her. Greldick nodded and spoke briefly to his first mate. The sailors ran a plank across to the wharf, and Greldick led the way ashore. Thick clouds were rolling in overhead, darkening the sun. The street, which ran down to the wharf, was lined on both sides with the shops of Drasnian merchants, and Nyissans moved torpidly. We've had both turbid and torpid, which I think mean very different things, don't they? If I'm not mistaken. And Nyissans moved torpidly from shop to shop, stopping now and then to haggle with the sweating shopkeepers. The Nyissan men all wore loose-fitting robes of a light, iridescent fabric, and their heads were all shaved completely bald. I wouldn't fit in. As he walked along behind Aunt Pole, Garion noticed with a certain distaste that the Nyissans wore elaborate makeup on their eyes, and that their lips and cheeks were rouged. Now Garion's being a little bit of a prude. Their speech was rasping and sibilant, and they all seemed to affect a lisp. I mean, if they all do it, then that's more of a dialect or an accent, right? Than affecting. Norma says, kind of. Turbid is like thick and opaque, pertaining to liquid, and torpid is like lazily, slow, and dozy. Yeah, alright. I think that's roughly... I guess it's not completely different, the way I was saying. They're similar in a certain way. They're both slow. The heavy clouds had by now completely obscured the sky, and the street seemed suddenly dark. A dozen wretched, near-naked men were repairing a section of cobblestones. Their unkempt hair... Oh, so there are people... There are... Just... Yeah. Their unkempt hair and shaggy beards indicated that they were not Nyissan, and there were shackles and chains attached to their ankles. A brutal-looking Nyissan stood over them with a whip, and the fresh welts and cuts on their bodies spoke mutely of the freedom with which he used it. One of the miserable slaves accidentally dropped an armload of crudely squared-off stones on his foot, and opened his mouth with an animal-like howl of pain. With horror, Garion saw that the slave's tongue had been cut out. Shelov Trizzy says, interesting. Hi, we are reading Queen of Sorcery by David Eddings, and our party of travelers is in an unpleasant place right now that, oh, I'm all out of focus, that happens to be a slave-owning society. It's not a great place. They also seem to worship snakes, or at least revere them. And it's also kind of in a swamp, so it's just kind of nasty. Farmo says it's also warm, buggy, and muggy. Yeah. But yeah, welcome. Feel free to join us. We are kind of nearish the end of the book, but there's some interesting stuff to come here.
They reduce men to the level of beasts, Mandaralin growled, his eyes burning with a terrible anger. Why has this cesspool not been cleansed? It was once, Barak said grimly, just after the Nyissans assassinated the river.
It says the River King, but that is almost certainly supposed to be Revan King. Does the Sharky's copy say River King? Because that's, yeah, my copy says the River King, but that's got to be Revan. That's another typo. There's been a few typos in this copy.
Just after the Nyissans assassinated the Revan King, the Alorns came down here and killed every Nyissan they could find.
Sharky's copy says Revan. Your copy seems to be better edited for the most part than mine. That's unusual. I wonder why that is. Because again, this isn't... I mean, I guess it's a slightly older copy.
Their numbers appear undiminished, Mandaralin said, looking around. Barak shrugged. It was 1,300 years ago. Even a single pair of rats could re-establish their species in that length of time.
Dernick, who was walking beside Garion, gasped suddenly and averted his eyes, blushing furiously. A Nyissan lady had just stepped from a litter carried by 8 slaves. The fabric of her pale green gown was so flimsy that it was nearly transparent, and left very little to the imagination.
Don't look at her, Garion,
Dernick whispered hoarsely, still blushing.
She's a wicked woman.
I'd forgotten about that, Aunt Pole said with a thoughtful frown. Maybe we should have left Dernick and Garion on the ship. Sharky say, prudish Dernick strikes again. Ugh, I'm still all out of focus. Come on, camera. Do your job. I'm back here. I'm back here. Hey. Hello. I don't know why I'm talking to the camera like you can hear me. I'm going to close the shutter and open it, see if that fixes it. And by shutter, I mean cover. Can you focus on me? No? That's fine, whatever. Why is she dressed like that? Garion asked, watching the nearly nude woman.
Undressed, you mean?
Dernick's voice was strangled with outrage. It's the custom, Aunt Pole explained.
It has to do with the climate. There are some other reasons, of course, but we don't need to go into those just now. All Nyissan women dress that way. Barak and Greldick were watching the woman also, their broad grins appreciative. Never mind, Aunt Pole told them firmly. Not far away, a shaven-headed Nyissan stood leaning against a wall, staring at his hand and giggling senselessly. "I can see right through my fingers," he announced in a hissing lisp. "Right through them." "Drunk?" Hatar asked. "Not exactly," Aunt Pole answered. "Nyissans have peculiar amusements. Leaves, berries, certain roots. Their perceptions get modified. It's a bit more serious than the common drunkenness one finds among Alorns." Sharky say, "I think that guy's more stoned." Yup. Another Nyissan shambled by, his gait curiously jerky and his expression blank. "Doth this condition prevail widely?" Mandaralin asked. "I've never met a Nyissan yet who wasn't at least partially drugged," Aunt Pole said. "It makes them difficult to talk to. Isn't that the house we're looking for?" She pointed at a solid building across the street. Farmo says, "Psychedelics. That was the topic of her class on Tuesday." There was an ominous rumble of thunder off to the south as they crossed to the large house. A Drasnian servant in a linen tunic answered their knock, let them into a dimly lighted antechamber, and told them to wait. The Sharky say, "That last Nyissan passing by with a blank face, that was a mime." Lord Vetinari would not approve of Nyissa. Learn the words! "An evil city," Hatar said quietly. "I can't see why any Alorn in his right mind would come here willingly." "Money," Captain Greldick replied shortly. "The Nyissan trade is very profitable." "There are more important things than money," Hatar muttered. An enormously fat man came into the dim room. "More light," he snapped at his servant. "You didn't have to leave them here in the dark." "You said that the lamps just made it hotter," the servant protested in a surly tone. "I wish you'd make up your mind." "Never mind what I said. Just do as I say." Parmo says, "Aziz! Light!" "The climate's making you incoherent, Drawblack," the servant noted acidly. He lit several lamps and left the room, muttering to himself. "Drasnians make the world's worst servants," Drawblack grumbled. "Shall we get down to business?" He lowered his vast bulk into a chair. The sweat rolled continually down his face and into the damp collar of his brown silk robe. Almost on a roll here with the references. Let's get down to business to defeat the Huns. Although, to be fair, he said, "Shall we get down to business?" But I feel like that wouldn't fit in this song quite as well. "My name's Greldick," the bearded seaman said. "I've just arrived at your wharves with a shipload of goods belonging to the merchant, Radek of Boktor." He presented the folded packets of parchment. Droblek's eyes narrowed. I didn't know that Radek was interested in the southern trade. I thought he dealt mostly in Sandaria and Arendia. Greldick shrugged indifferently. I didn't ask him. He pays me to carry his goods in my ship, not to ask questions about his business. Droblek looked at them all, his sweating face expressionless. Then his fingers moved slightly. Is everything here what it seems to be? The Drasnian's secret language made his fat fingers suddenly nimble. Can we speak openly here? Aunt Pole's fingers asked him. Her gestures were stately, somehow archaic. There was a kind of formality to her movements that Garion had not seen in the signs made by others. As openly as any place in this pest hole, Droblek replied. That's still in the sign language. You have a strange accent, lady. There's something about it that it seems I should remember. I learned the language a very long time ago, she replied. You know who Radek of Boktor really is, of course. Naturally, Droblek said aloud. Everyone knows that. I hope that's not true. Sometimes he calls himself Ambar of Kotu, when he wants to have dealings that are not, strictly speaking, legitimate. Shall we stop fencing with each other, Droblek? Aunt Pole asked quietly. I'm quite certain you've received instructions from King Rodar by now. All this dancing about is tiresome. Droblek's face darkened. I'm sorry, he said stiffly. I'll need a bit more in the way of verification. Don't be an idiot, Droblek, Barak rumbled at the fat man. Use your eyes. You're an Alorn. You know who this lady is. Droblek looked suddenly at Aunt Pole, his eyes going very wide. It's not possible, he gasped. Would you like to have her prove it to you? Hetar suggested. The house shook with a sudden crash of thunder. Timing. No. Droblek refused hastily, still staring at Aunt Pole. It just never occurred to me. I mean, I just never... He floundered with it. The Sharkies say, Frau Blocher! Frenzied neighing. Pharma says I beat her to it. Have you heard from Prince Keldar or my father? Aunt Pole asked crisply. Armo says, what a big castle. Your father? You mean, is he involved in this too? Really, Droblek, she said tartly. Don't you believe the communications King Rodar sends you? Droblek shook his head like a man trying to clear his mind. I'm sorry, Lady Polgara, he said. You surprised me, that's all. It takes a moment to get used to. We didn't think you'd be coming this far south. It's obvious, then, that you haven't received any word from Keldar or the old man. No, my lady, Droblek said. Nothing. Are they supposed to be here? So they said. They were either going to meet us here or send word. Karma says, crack-a-pow. It's very hard to get messages any place in Nyissa, Droblek explained. The people here aren't very reliable. The prince and your father could be up country, and their messenger could very well have gone astray. I sent a message to a place not 10 leagues from this city once, and it took 6 months to arrive. The Nyissan who was carrying it found a certain berry patch along the way. We found him sitting in the middle of the patch, smiling. Droblek made a sour face. There was moss growing on him, he added. Dead? Dernick asked. Droblek shrugged. No, just very happy. He enjoyed the berries very much. I dismissed him at once, but he didn't seem to mind. For all I know, he's still sitting there.
Those must have been some nourishing berries. I've always wondered about that particular story. So, presumably, that messenger was sitting in this berry patch for at least 5 months. He said the message took 6 months to arrive, depending on how long it took them to find him and get the message the rest of the way. So, if everything in his story is true, either those are some very nourishing berries. I would say, maybe the messenger was wandering off to get food and then coming back, but he said there's moss growing on his face, so I don't know. I guess if the berries made him have, if they, paralyzed his face and he never touched it, maybe movement would still be okay. I don't know how this story makes sense. How extensive is your network here in this tour? Aunt Pole asked. Droblek spread his pudgy hands modestly.
I managed to pick up a bit of information here and there. I've got a few people in the palace, and a minor official at the Tolnedran embassy. The Tolnedrans are very thorough. He grinned impishly. It's cheaper to let them do all the work and then buy the information after they've gathered it.
Farmo says maybe he was exaggerating. Sharky, see, that was my thought. Yeah, most likely. Most likely, that's it. If you can believe what they tell you, Hetar suggested.
I never take what they say at face value, Droblek said. The Tolnedran ambassador knows that I've bought his man. He tries to trip me up with false leads now and then.
Does the ambassador know that you know? Hetar asked.
Of course he does, the fat man laughed. But he doesn't think that I'm aware of the fact that he knows that I know.
I appreciate that he tried to mix up the language a little there. He doesn't think that I'm aware of the fact that he knows that I know. So at least he didn't say, he doesn't know that I know that he knows that I know. He mixed it up a little to make it slightly more comprehensible. Sharky say, probably when you get some leaves caught in your hair and someone says you're growing a garden on your head. Maybe. He laughed again.
It's all terribly complicated, isn't it?
Most Drasnian games usually are,
Barak observed. Sharky say, this Drasnian's explanation is very Pratchett-esque. Yeah, I can see it. Does the name Zedar mean anything to you? Aunt Pole asked.
I've heard it, naturally, Droblek said.
Has he been in touch with Salmistra? Droblek frowned.
I couldn't say for sure. I haven't heard that he has, but that doesn't mean that he hasn't. Nyssa's a murky sort of place, and Salmisra's palace is the murkiest spot in the whole country. You wouldn't believe some of the things that go on there.
I'd believe them, Aunt Pole said, and probably things you haven't even begun to guess. She turned back to the others. I think we're at a standstill. We can't make any kind of move until we hear from Silk and the old wolf.
Could I offer you my house?
Droblick asked. I think we'll stay on board Captain Greldick's ship, she told him. As you say, Nyssa's a murky place, and I'm sure that the Tolnedran ambassadors bought a few people in your establishment. Should there be an apostrophe after ambassador for, like, the Tolnedran ambassador has bought a few people in your establishment? Because my copy does not have an apostrophe there. It's just ambassador with no punctuation S. I feel like that should have an apostrophe, right? No? No, yours doesn't? Parma says, wait, how is the sentence? I'm sure that the Tolnedran ambassadors bought a few people in your establishment. I don't know if it'll focus, but it's right here. Sharkies don't think it should have one. Pharma says if there's more than one ambassador. Okay. Like if the plural ambassadors have bought people. Sharky say there's nothing possessive about the statement. Pharma says the Tolnedran guys bought a few of your people. So it depends on whether there are one or more ambassadors that she's speaking about. I think they're talking about an individual, based on the way the conversation went before. Because when they were talking about the ambassador before, it was singular, and the Droblick referred to him as he knows, things like that before. That she isn't using it. It's just ambassador with an S, no apostrophe, and there's only one ambassador that they're talking about. Anyways, I'm going to move on. I'm sure that the Tolnedran ambassadors bought a few people in your establishment.
Naturally,
Droblick agreed.
But I know who they are.
Sharky say, okay, maybe if it's a single ambassador, but since neither copy has it, I'd be inclined to say it's multiple ambassadors. I'm pretty sure it's only one ambassador, because they're talking about the Tolnedran ambassador, and but previously they were saying, like he says, the Tolnedran ambassador knows that I bought his man. He tries to trip me up with false leads now and then. They're talking about the same guy. Because, again, she says the Tolnedran ambassadors bought a few people. And then Pharma says contraction of ambassador and has. Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought the Tolnedran ambassador has bought a few people in your establishment. All right.
Naturally, Droblick agreed, but I know who they are.
We'd better not chance it, she told him. There are several reasons for our avoiding Tolnedrans just now.
Yep, yeah. There's at least one big one I can think of.
Probably some others. We'll stay aboard the ship and keep out of sight. Let us know as soon as Prince Keldar gets in touch with you.
Of course, Droblek said. You'll have to wait until the rain lets up, though. Listen to it.
There was the thundering sound of a downpour on the roof overhead. Will it last long? Dernick asked. Droblek shrugged. Okay, now this has got to be a typo because my copy says a hour or so, but it's AH. AH space hour or so. Small reason, says Farmos. Sinedra is very small, but Sinedra's title is very big. Yeah, my copy says a hour or so.
An hour or so, usually. It rains every afternoon during this season.
Sharky's copy says an. Yeah, I think it should be an hour. Farmos was making... I know you were making a funny, so was I. Big title. It's funny. It's not very funny, I'm sorry. Neither of our jokes were very funny.
It rains every afternoon during this season.
I imagine it helps to cool the air,
the smith said.
Not significantly,
the Drasnian told him.
Usually it just makes things worse.
He mopped the sweat from his fat face.
How can you live here?
Dernick asked. Droblek smiled blandly.
Fat men don't move around all that much. I'm making a great deal of money, and the game I'm playing with the Tolnedran ambassador keeps my mind occupied. It's not all that bad once you get used to it. It helps if I keep telling myself that.
They sat quietly then, listening to the pounding rain. Droblek seems all right. Eddings is doing that thing again where he just can't stop mentioning that he's fat, but it's not necessarily... It's not being done, I think, in a malicious way, right? It's just being descriptive. And it's important to accept that kind of description, right? I don't know if that's how it was intended, which is the tricky part. But I think if I take it in the most optimistic light possible, that it was intended to just be a neutral description, then I think it's fine. I don't know. Am I being too generous? Not critical enough? Pharma says, and he's not made out to be an evil or unusually greedy or bad dude in terms of Drasnians. No. He's behaving typically in a Drasnian fashion. He's helpful. He's got a sense of humor. I don't know. I like Droblek, like, as a character. Not like he's a huge character or anything, story impact-wise, but he seems fun. And yes, they're not villainizing him, like they're not using it as fat equals bad, like Farmos is saying. So that's the end of, well, they sat quietly then listening to the pounding rain, is the end of chapter 24. It's 20 after 8. Chapter 26, or 25, chapter 25 is, what is that, 7 pages long, roughly? 6 or 7? I think it's about 6, because 2 of them are half pages in my copy. Pharma says in the same way that sometimes he does ugly equals bad. I don't know that I will 100% agree with that, but some of that is based off of things we haven't read yet, and also, like, he's done Angarax, Murgo's, whatever, equal bad. right? So we've got the racial divide. We've talked about that a fair amount. I think, it's somewhat balanced by the fact that the peoples are all divided up by their gods and they take after their gods in certain ways. So it's not necessarily that this race of people are bad because they are this race. It's because they are all influenced by a divine being to be the way that they are. It's not perfect, but I think it's not necessarily so bad as it could be. Like, at least there's a reasoning for it that's, you were thinking Brill mostly. Yeah. But I mean, otherwise, like, we've had scarred faces, but that's a ritual scarring. I don't know if, like, Chamdar was ever particularly described as being ugly specifically, but yes, Brill is unkempt and smelly, and he's got the, like, drifting eye and everything, so that's an example for sure. But, like, we've also had the Earl of Yarvek. I think he might have even been, like, described as somewhat good looking, and he was definitely, I'd say both misguided and misguided to the point of becoming evil. We've had various Nissans who have been evil, who have been, I mean, they've all got the shaved head thing going on, but not necessarily ugly. I don't know. Brill is definitely an example, but I don't think it's common enough to say that in these books, ugly equals evil. And definitely not evil equals ugly, because that's disproven, I think. Parmo says this was just an instance where he was sort of marked as bad because of his appearance before he was actually found. Yeah, Brill's definitely, like, I agree with Brill. And I think we will talk about that probably more later. Not that we will necessarily ever see Brill again, but if we were, you did say sometimes. Yeah, I'm not trying to, like, completely, I missed the Sharkies thing. I'm sorry if I was trying to say you're wrong. I didn't mean it that way. But I do think that there will be, anyways. It's hard to talk about because also some of the stuff I want to talk about, I can't. Sharky say, that kind of reference to a fat man usually reminds us of a 40s movie, A Holiday Affair. It has some clothes shopkeeper say, a 46? We usually keep a few of those aside for, he leans forward with emphasis, fat men. That's a bit weird. But Farmo says, in contrast, can't think of an instance of fat equals bad in Eddings. Oh, puppy is sleep woofing? Oh, I try not to wake him up. I said the P word. The P-U-P-P-Y word. No, I think honestly, more often, any of the fat characters have been good guys. I think they've all been, for the most part, pretty helpful, really. Maybe not every single one has been helpful. Like, I can't think of every minor character. But we've had fat kings and merchants, mostly. Those two, I would say. So yeah, the next chapter is around 6-ish pages long. It's 8:25 on a Friday. My time. Should I keep going or should we stop there for the weekend? How do people feel? Other than sore? Farmos is okay with stopping. Sharkies could go either way. Let me take a quick look at what the next chapter is. There is some stuff I'd be happy to get to in the next chapter. I don't think it would take a super long time. You okay with going on, Farmos? Or would you prefer to stop? Okay. Well, I'm going to keep going and you think about that. Chapter 25. For the next several days, they all remained aboard Greldic's ship, waiting for word from Silk and Mr. Wolf. Sinedra recovered from her indisposition and appeared on deck wearing a pale-colored dryad tunic, which seemed to Garion to be only slightly less revealing than the gowns worn by Nyissan women. When he rather stiffly suggested that she ought to put on a few more clothes, however, she merely laughed at him, with a single-mindedness that made him want to grind his teeth. She returned to the task of teaching him to read and write. They sat together in an out-of-the-way spot on deck, poring over a tedious book on Tolnedran diplomacy. Sharky say, yikes, poor choice, Garion. A tedious book on Tolnedran diplomacy. That's a fun way to learn how to read. The whole business seemed to Garion to be taking forever, though in fact his mind was very quick, and he was learning surprisingly fast. Sinedra was too thoughtless to compliment him, though she seemed to await his next mistake almost breathlessly, delighting, it seemed, in each opportunity to ridicule him. Farmos says Tolnedrans also had a more cavalier attitude towards nudity. Oh yeah, no, there was the whole chapter where she was talking about how they do they're Romans. They've got mixed bathing and open air games that are performed without clothes. Basically the Olympics, right? Or not the Olympics, but the Roman games. Her proximity and her light, spicy perfume distracted him as they sat close beside each other, and he perspired as much from their occasional touch of hand or arm or hip as he did from the climate. Oh boy, Garion. Colosseum, Farmos says. Well, but she was also talking about different sports, like running and things. She did races. Because they were both young, she was intolerant and he was stubborn. The sticky, humid heat made them both short-tempered and irritable, so the lessons erupted into bickering more often than not. Farmos is just digging into her lack of Roman history knowledge. I see. When they arose one morning, a black, square-rigged Nyissan ship rocked in the river current at a nearby wharf. A foul, evil kind of reek carried to them from her on the fitful morning breeze. "What's that smell?" Garion asked one of the sailors. "Slaver," the sailor answered grimly, pointing at the Nyissan ship. "You can smell them 20 miles away when you're at sea." Farmos says, wait until after Assassin's Creed does a Roman game. Have they not already? I am pretty sure I climbed the Colosseum in one of the games. I forget which one. I'm pretty sure they have already. That was Italian, not Roman. I thought they had done Ezio. No, I thought there was one after Ezio that was a little more open world. Well, I guess they were all pretty open world. I thought there was a more recent one. I might be thinking of the Greek one. Chip Alex. With the yelling Liara emoji. Sharky said, long ago, Mrs. Sharky was teaching Mr. how to drive a standard vehicle. I don't recommend partners trying to teach something super frustrating. That's fair. Well, to be fair, I think you're kind of jumping ahead a little bit here. You're jumping the gun. You're making some assumptions about their relationship status. Chip Alex, we are just encountering some slavers in our book here. A slaver ship has just pulled up to dock.
You can smell them 20 miles away when you're at sea.
Garion looked at the ugly black ship and shuddered. Barak and Mandaralan drifted across the deck and joined Garion at the rail.
Looks like a scow,
Barak said of the Nyissan ship, his voice heavy with contempt. He was stripped to the waist, and his hairy torso ran with sweat. Also, Chip Alex, you missed Muscle Wizard earlier. We had Muscle Wizard on the stream. Sharky say, they're in their mid-teens. Even if they aren't romantic partners, it's in the back of their heads anyways. Farmo says maybe even further forward than that. Yeah, I think we've got an idea that that might be the case. It's a slave ship, Garion told him.
It smells like an open sewer,
Barak complained.
A good fire would improve it tremendously.
A sorry trade, my lord Barak, Mandaralan said. Nyissa hath dealt in human misery for untold centuries.
Is that a Drasnian wharf?
Barak asked with narrowed eyes. No, Garion answered. The sailors say that everything on that side's Nyissan.
That's a shame,
Barak growled. A group of mail-shirted men, M-A-I-L, mail-shirted men in black cloaks walked out onto the wharf where the slave ship was moored and stopped near the vessel's stern.
Uh-oh,
Barak said.
Where's Hatar?
He's still below, Garion replied. What's the matter?
Keep an eye out for him. Those are Murgos.
The shaven-head Nyissan sailors pulled open a hatch on their ship and barked a few rough orders down into the hold. Slowly, a line of dispirited-looking men came up. Each man wore an iron collar, and a long chain fastened them together. Mandaralan stiffened and began to swear. Oh, I don't know if we've had Mandaralan specifically swear before. Barak, yes. Mandaralan, I don't know.
What's wrong?
Barak asked. A rendishman, the knight exclaimed. I had heard of this, but I did not believe it.
Heard of what?
An ugly rumor hath persisted in Arendia for some years, Mandaralan answered, his face white with rage. We are told that some of our nobles have upon occasion enriched themselves by selling their serfs to the Nyissans.
Looks like it's more than a rumor,
Barak said.
There,
Mandaralan growled. See that crest upon the tunic of that one there? It's the crest of Vo-Toral. I know the Baron of Vo-Toral for a notorious spendthrift, but had not thought him dishonorable,
Upon my return to Arendia, I will denounce him publicly.
What good's that going to do?
Barak asked. He will be forced to challenge me, Mandaralan said grimly. I will prove his villainy upon his body. Barak shrugged.
Serf or slave? What's the difference?
Those men have rights, my lord, Mandaralan stated. Their lord is required to protect them and care for them. The oath of knighthood demands it of us. This vile transaction hath stained the honor of every true Arendish knight. I shall not rest until I have bereft that foul baron of his miserable life. Sharky said Barak kind of said what I was thinking too. We never saw the serfs chained up or whipped. We saw them in very bad living conditions. We saw them starving, but we didn't ever see them chained up or whipped. Farmo says, plus public opinion is pretty important to Mimbrates. I do think maybe Detton or Lammer said that they would be whipped if they weren't doing their job. So maybe I'm being a little too generous there. We did hear about whipping, I think. But we didn't see them chained up. They were allowed to go home, as far as I'm aware, at the end of each day. They're allowed to have families. We know that. Sharky say true, but some were basically forced in a life of perpetual servitude. Yeah, no, it's bad. The serf situation is bad. I absolutely agree 100% that it is very close to slavery. But they, as Mandaralan says, they have rights. They're supposed to be protected. And as far as we're aware, they are allowed to, outside of their work, I guess, and taxes and things, live their own lives, you know, have families and whatnot. Yeah, Farmo says, maybe not as bad as being a Nyissan slave. From what we've seen of the Nyissan slaves, they have it worse. Tongues cut out, chained together, men standing with whips over them while they work and being liberal with their usage, plus being sold to Murgos, which now we've got serfs being sold to Murgos, but they're not supposed to be. So, I would still say that probably almost definitively the serfs have it better than the slaves. Both have it bad.
Interesting idea,
Barak said, regarding depriving the Baron of his life.
Maybe I'll go with you.
Hatar came up on deck. Oh boy. And Barak moved immediately to his side and began talking quietly to him, holding one of his arms firmly.
Make them jump around a bit,
one of the Murgos ordered harshly.
I want to see how many are lame.
A heavy-shouldered Nyissan uncoiled a long whip and began to flick it deftly at the legs of the chained men. The slaves began to dance feverishly on the wharf beside the slave ship.
Dog's blood,
Mandaralan swore. Now, in another book, I've seen God's blood used as a swear. So, excuse my language, I guess. But dog's blood is a little strange. Sharky say didn't realize they were close enough to hear clear conversation. Yeah, these were only like 2 docks over or something. And, you know, in a marina, that can be pretty close, right?
It's not like there's really anything between them, apparently. There's no ships docked between them. So, the only thing between them is thick Nyissan air.
Dog's blood, Mandaralin swore, and his knuckles turned white as he gripped the railing. Easy, Garion warned. Aunt Pole says we're supposed to stay pretty much out of sight. It cannot be borne, Mandaralin cried.
Farmo says maybe a boulderized version Mandaralin as an upstanding knight uses. Maybe. I think actually in the other book that I'm thinking of where it was used, which was in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, I think it may have been a knight that said God's blood. I think it got used a few times. The chain that bound the slaves together was old and pitted with rust. When one slave tripped and fell, a link snapped, and the man found himself suddenly free. With an agility born of desperation, he rolled quickly to his feet, took 2 quick steps, and plunged off the wharf into the murky waters of the river. "This way, man!" Mandaralin called to the swimming slave. The burly Nyissan with the whip laughed harshly and pointed at the escaping slave. "Watch," he told the Murgos. "Stop him, you idiot," one of the Murgos snapped. "I paid good gold for him." Farmo says, fun fact, Zounds is a contraction of gods and wounds. Yeah, I've heard that before. "It's too late." The Nyissan looked on with an ugly grin. "Watch." The swimming man suddenly shrieked and sank out of sight. When he came up again, his face and arms were covered with the slimy, foot-long leeches that infested the river. Screaming, the struggling man tore at the writhing leeches, ripping out chunks of his own flesh in his efforts to pull them off. The Sharky say, those are the screeching eels. Oh. The Murgos began to laugh. Garion's mind exploded. He gathered himself with an awful concentration, pointed one hand at the wharf just beyond their own ship, and said, "Be there!" He felt an enormous surge as if some vast tide were rushing out of him, and he reeled almost senselessly against Mandaralin. The sound inside his head was deafening. The slave, still writhing and covered with the oozing leeches, was suddenly lying on the wharf. A wave of exhaustion swept over Garion. If Mandaralin had not caught him, he would have fallen.
"Where did he go?"
Barak demanded, still staring at the turbulent spot on the surface of the river. We've had turbid, torpid, and now turbulent. At the turbulent spot on the river where the slave had been an instant before.
"Did he go under?"
Wordlessly, and with a shaking head, Mandaralin pointed at the slave, who lay still weakly struggling on the Drasnian wharf about 20 yards in front of the bow of their ship. Barak looked at the slave, then back at the river. The big man blinked with surprise. A small boat with 4 Nyissans at the oars put out from the other wharf and moved deliberately toward Greldic's ship. A tall Murgo stood in the bow, his scarred face angry.
"You have my property,"
he shouted across the intervening water.
"Return the slave to me at once." "Why don't you come and claim him, Murgo?"
Barak called back. He released Hetar's arm. The Algar moved to the side of the ship, stopping only to pick up a long boat hook.
"Will I be unmolested?"
the Murgo asked, a bit doubtfully.
"Why don't you come alongside and we'll discuss it?"
Barak suggested, pleasantly.
"You're denying me my rights to my own property,"
the Murgo complained.
"Not at all,"
Barak told him.
"Of course, there might be a fine point of law involved here."
Lawyer Barak coming up.
"This wharf is Drasnian territory, and slavery isn't legal in Drasnia. Since that's the case, the man's not a slave anymore." "I'll get my men," the Murgo said. "We'll take the slave by force if we have to." "I think we'd have to look on that as an invasion of Alorn territory,"
Barak warned with a great show of regret.
"In the absence of our Drasnian cousins, we'd almost be compelled to take steps to defend their wharf for them. What do you think, Mandaralin?"
"Thy perceptions are most acute, my lord," Mandaralin replied. "By common usage, honorable men are morally obliged to defend the territory of kinsmen in their absence." The Sharkies say once again, threats first, explanations later. The wharf is apparently an embassy. Pharma says, I mean, only certain ships can moor there. I guess it's a part of the Drasnian territory in Sistor. I don't think that's unusual, right? Like, if you think about American military bases, those are considered American territory even if they're in other countries, just as an example. This, I think, would be similar-ish, right?
"There,"
Barak said to the Murgo.
"You see how it is. My friend here is an errand, so he's totally neutral in this matter. I think we'd have to accept his interpretation of the affair."
My friend, totally neutral. Same sentence. Greldic's sailors had begun to climb the rigging by now, and they clung to the ropes like great, evil-looking apes, fingering their weapons and grinning at the Murgo.
"There is yet another way,"
the Murgo said ominously. Garion could feel a force beginning to build, and a faint sound seemed to echo inside his head. He drew himself up, putting his hands on the wooden railing in front of him. He felt a terrible weakness, but he steeled himself and tried to gather his strength. The chat's full of hanking. The chat's full of hanky-panky. "That's enough of that," Aunt Pole said crisply, coming up on deck with Dernick and Sinedra behind her.
"We were merely having a little legal discussion,"
Barak said innocently. "I know what you were doing," she snapped. Her eyes were angry. She looked coldly across the intervening stretch of river at the Murgo. "You'd better leave," she told him.
"I have something to retrieve first,"
the man in the boat called back. "I'd forget about it."
"We'll see,"
he said. He straightened and began muttering as if to himself, his hands moving rapidly in a series of intricate gestures. We've heard about this before, that some people think that's necessary, but have been told that it's not. Garion felt something pushing at him, almost like a wind. though the air was completely still. "Be sure you get it right," Aunt Pole advised quietly. "If you forget even the tiniest part of it, it'll explode in your face." The man in the boat froze, and a faintly worried frown crossed his face. The secret wind that had been pushing at Geryon stopped. The man began again, his fingers weaving in the air and his face fixed with concentration. "You do it like this, Grolim," Aunt Pole said. She moved her hand slightly, and Geryon felt a sudden rush as if the wind pushing at him had turned and begun to blow the other way. The Grolim threw his hands up and reeled back, stumbling and falling into the bottom of his boat. As if he had been given a heavy push, the boat surged backward several yards. The Grolim half raised, his eyes wide and his face deathly pale. "Return to your master, dog," Aunt Pole said scathingly. "Tell him to beat you for not learning your lessons properly." The Grolim spoke quickly to the Nissans at the oars, and they immediately turned the boat and rowed back toward the slave ship.
"We had a nice little fight brewing there, Polgara," Barak complained. "Why did you have to spoil it?"
"Grow up," she ordered bluntly. Then she turned on Geryon, her eyes blazing and the white lock at her brow like a streak of fire. "You idiot! You refuse any kind of instruction, and then you burst out like a raging bull. Have you the slightest conception of what an uproar translocation causes? You've alerted every Grolim in this store to the fact that we're here." "He was dying," Geryon protested, gesturing helplessly at the slave lying on the wharf. "I had to do something." "He was dead as soon as he hit the water," she said flatly. "Look at him." The slave had stiffened into an arched posture of mortal agony, his head twisted back and his mouth agape. He was obviously dead. "What happened to him?" Geryon asked, feeling suddenly sick. "The leeches are poisonous. Their bites paralyze their victims so that they can feed on them undisturbed. The bites stopped his heart. You exposed us to the Grolims for the sake of a dead man." "He wasn't dead when I did it!" Geryon shouted at her. "He was screaming for help!" He was angrier than he had ever been in his life. He was beyond help. Her voice was cold, even brutal. "What kind of monster are you?" he asked from between clenched teeth. "Don't you have any feelings? You'd just have let him die, wouldn't you?" "I don't think this is the time or place to discuss it." "No, this is the time. Right now, Aunt Pole. You're not even human. Did you know that? You left being human behind so long ago that you can't even remember where you lost it. You're 4,000 years old. Our whole lives go by while you blink your eyes. We are just an entertainment for you, an hour's diversion. You manipulate us like puppets for your own amusement. Well, I'm tired of being manipulated. You and I are finished." It probably went further than he'd intended. But his anger had finally run away with him, and the words seemed to rush out before he could stop them. She looked at him, her face as pale as if he had suddenly struck her. Then she drew herself up. "You stupid boy," she said in a voice that was all the more terrible because it was so quiet. "Finished? You and I? How can you even begin to understand what I've had to do to bring you to this world? You've been my only care for over 1,000 years. I've endured anguish and loss and pain beyond your ability to understand what the words mean, all for you. I've lived in poverty and squalor for hundreds of years at a time, all for you. I gave up a sister I loved more than my life itself, all for you. I've gone through fire and despair, worse than fire, 12 times over, all for you. And you think this has all been an entertainment for me? Some idle amusement? You think the kind of care I've devoted to you for 1,000 years and more comes cheaply? You and I will never be finished, Belgarian. Never. We will go on together until the end of days if necessary. We will never be finished. You owe me too much for that. There was a dreadful silence. The others, shocked by the intensity of Aunt Pole's words, stood staring first at her and then at Garion. Without speaking further, she turned and went below decks again. Garion looked around helplessly, suddenly terribly ashamed and terribly alone. I had to do it, didn't I? He asked of no one in particular, and not entirely sure what it was that he meant. They all looked at him, but no one answered his question. And that's the end of chapter 25. That was a lot. Let's go back a little bit. Pharma says, Paul, you tell him to use his magic and accept that he can use it, but then get angry at him because he didn't do it in the way you liked. I understand what she meant there. She did come on very aggressively, but she didn't tell him. She wanted him to accept instruction. And who knows, what he did. Like, first of all, like she said, he alerted every Grolem in the store to their presence. That's potentially mortally dangerous. And Pharma says, I don't think she's being fair, though probably neither is he. She focusing perhaps on the wrong things. And also, come on, that's really not going to fix things between them. Sharky say, fights between teens and their caregivers are usually like that. And Pharma says, yeah. I mean, maybe not exactly like this, but, similar emotions, similar intents in some cases. But there's a few things to unpack there, especially from what she said. What he said, do I have something, or is that just light reflecting weird? I feel like I've got something in my hair here. Turn my head this way, and I'm like, what is that? She dropped some information in her anger there, and he said some pretty awful things. Some quite awful things. And that's probably a little more of Aunt Pole's history than we have ever heard before. Not a lot of specifics, but also her basically, I don't know, the way she's saying that it was all for Garion is interesting. Also, she said the name Belgarian in front of everybody out loud. Hello, new chatter. We're just talking about a book we've been reading. Are you aware of the Belgariad? Yeah? We're on the second book. And we're somewhat close to the end. You read all 12 books. All right. So, the Belgariad, the Malorian, and try not to drop any spoilers, I would appreciate, because we have some people in the chat that have not read it before that are going through it for the first time. I've read the 11th book, but I don't know if I've read the 12th one. If I have, it was a long time ago. I've definitely read the 11th book, but I'm not certain about the 12th one. Pharma says, yeah, we just had a very big fight between, they're in Sthis-Tor, and Garion just teleported a slave from one dock over to the other, but the slave died, and then, is the Malorian 7 books? I thought the Malorian was another 5. Doesn't it go through Cirrus of Kel? If there's more than 5 books of the Malorian, I think the Malorian is, the Belgariad is 5, the Malorian is 5, I think. And then, I'm pretty sure, because I've definitely read all of the Malorian. Unless there were another extra 2 books at the end, but I don't think there are. According to this printing, the Malorian has 5 books, but this is a somewhat older print, so yeah, 6 to 10. That sounds more right. So yeah, Garion and Polgara just had a pretty big fight, and that's where we have just stopped in Nyissa in Sthis-Tor. Pharma says that Aunt Pol sees him as a child that can't understand things. They both expect one another to understand each other's feelings, but without talking about them openly. Might you suggest a book to read? Please do. Mostly I've been reading books that I have read before. After we're done this one, we'll talk about whether we're just going to go straight into the next one in the series. Though we're going to stop here for tonight. But it may be the next one in the series, or we might take a dip off to somewhere else. God of Fishing on light novel. I haven't done any. All I've done is print books so far. This is our 4th book. We started with The Hobbit. We've read a Terry Pratchett novel, Guards. Kind of like I've read a fair amount of, like myself, I have read many isekai novels of various types. Japanese, Korean, and Chinese novels. Which all have their own different traits, I find. But I haven't read God of Fishing specifically. I'm pretty sure I've heard of it. And what Japanese? I've read all of the web novel version of Death March, and I've read all of Slime. So I reincarnated as a slime. I've read the web novels, I think versions of both of those. And I read most of Reincarnated as a Spider. But the web novel version of that got very confusing later on, and I kind of ended up dropping it probably pretty close to the end, sadly, because I was just losing track of what was going on. There were characters being introduced really late in the story that had huge amounts of backstory that I think kind of got introduced through like side stories that I hadn't read and things like that, so I was getting very confused when I read that one. I should go back at some point maybe and read the actual like light novel adaptation of that one, the like more refined version. Because usually it's like web novel comes first, and then the author irons out kinks and things and edits it, and then it kind of gets rewritten as a light novel, and then the manga, and then the anime if that ever happens. Farmos just took a quick look at the synopsis for God of Fishing. I'm sure I've heard of it, but I don't know the details. Maybe I'll take a look at it myself. But for now, I think I'd like to stick to things that I can keep print versions of. I think it's just got a certain je ne sais quoi reading from an actual book. Even, I've got a Kindle and whatnot, and I'm sure I could figure out a way to put other books on that. But for now, I think I'll stick with paperbacks, hardcovers. Yeah, so that was a heavy... We went from kind of a very descriptive chapter that told us all about how awful it is to be in Nyissa, and then just had some kind of like political talk. And then we went to a much more eventful chapter after that, with the Garion using more magic and having that awful fight. A little bit of balance there, but we're leaving on kind of a sour note, aren't we? This is not a happy time for Garion. He's going through some rough stuff. Sharky say the longest book Mrs. has ever read was translated from Japanese, over 800 pages. Brave Story by Miyuki Miyabi, though it was quite a while ago now, so I mostly forget what it's about. I've definitely read some very long translated stories. Like Death March and Reincarnated as a Slime were both very long. They're not quite so classical, they're fantasy stuff. I remember a friend of mine asked if I'd heard of a particular, I think it's a Korean one. And I was like, oh yeah, no, it took me a little bit, and then I was like, hang on, I've read some of that. And then I opened the browser on my phone and realized that I actually had it still open. And I was like, oh, according to this, let me see if it's still here. I might have, no? Oh, there it is. No, it's neither of those. Is it solo leveling or? If it was solo leveling, then I'm on chapter 200 and something. Yeah, solo leveling, I'm on chapter 220-ish, I think, maybe 230. And then I'm noticing now that a different one called, where did it go? Super God Gene, which is a Korean one. I'm on chapter 1611. So, yeah. That one has gone on for a very long time. Korean light novels are unusual in some ways. They're like, their logic and the personalities of their characters, from what I've seen, like similarities between different ones, tend to not always follow what I would think as being very heroic. There's a lot of ego, I find, in those characters. Farmo says, I feel more empathy for Garion in this case, but he's the main protagonist, so we see more of his side in general. Sharky say, plus, we've all been 15 years old and felt misunderstood. As far as I know, none of us has ever been 4,000. Yeah. Farmo says, apparently there's an anime movie of Brave Story based on the novel. Sharky's going to try and find that. I hope it's good. Alright, well... Pharma says, in general, I felt a bigger divide between them since he started magicking. Yeah, definitely. She turned kind of not very understanding towards him, it felt like. Like, they've had rifts between them before, which they've patched back up, but this has been especially harsh. She's never acknowledged the trauma he went through there. Yeah, like, the closest she came was coming up and being like, do you want to talk about it? And he was like, no. But, he's like 14 or 15, so of course that's how he's going to respond. You've got to be a little more, empathic than that. Empathetic? Sympathetic? I don't know. Like, he's just discovered magic, and he did it by burning a man to death. who's the first person he's ever killed. Plus, it's the person that killed his parents. So he's got all kinds of emotions swirling around everywhere right now. Like, he's got to deal with that, and it would be very helpful if you helped him with that. So it's weird a little bit that she is not helping him. Farmer says Brave Story had good reviews on IMDb for the movie. That's good. All right, well, it is after 9 o'clock, so we've been going for over 2 hours, and I'm getting kind of hungry. So I'm going to wrap things up. I don't see anyone on my list that's streaming right now. So have a good weekend, everyone. Thanks for joining us, newbie. It's nice to have someone else who's read the books separately before. That's fun. And yeah, good first weekend of April to everyone. Yeah, hopefully. Happy March 32nd. And I'll see everyone next Wednesday. Yeah, as Farmo says, I stream every Wednesday and Friday at 7 p.m. PST. Yeah, the only time I've missed one has been on Christmas Eve, I think. All right. Well, have a good night, have a good weekend, and hopefully I'll see you next week. Good night, bye.